The recovery room at Meridian Private had the kind of quiet that felt deliberate. Soft amber lights, the low rhythm of monitors, the particular hush that settles over a place where people are putting themselves back together. Elaine Beaumont had been awake for 11 minutes. She remembered the surgery briefing, the cold of the operating table, the anesthesiologist saying something warm and forgettable just before the count began. That was 5 hours ago. Now she lay with her left arm wrapped in gauze and an IV line running into her right, the ceiling tiles slightly out of focus, the morphine doing what morphine does. She was 37 years old, she had just had a tumor removed from her left breast, and she was, by the clinical definition of the word, stable. The door opened. For just a moment she thought it might be the night nurse coming to check her vitals again. But the smell told her otherwise. That particular cologne, cedar and something colder underneath, reached her before Preston Aldridge did. He didn't rush in. He never rushed anywhere. He stepped into the room with the easy confidence of a man who believed every space he entered belonged to him, which, in most of his life, it had. He was dressed like he'd come from the office, which he probably had. Dark navy suit, no tie tonight, top button undone. His shoes clicked softly against the floor. He didn't look at her IV lines. He didn't look at her gauze. He looked at the bedside tray and set a leather folder on top of it, with the quiet precision of someone completing a task. Elaine blinked. Preston. "How are you feeling?" He said it the way you ask about traffic. "I just woke up from surgery." Her voice came out rougher than she expected. He nodded once. "Good. The doctor said the margins were clear." He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "I need you to sign these. You'll have time to recover before anything moves forward, but the sooner you look them over, the better." She stared at the folder. Her brain, still wading through anesthesia, took a moment longer than usual to put the pieces together. Divorce papers, his firm's letterhead on the cover tab. Filed that morning, according to the timestamp at the top of the first page. That morning, before she had even gone under. "Preston." Her voice had gone very quiet. "I was in surgery this morning." "I know that. You filed while I was in surgery." He exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that meant he found her reaction inconvenient rather than unreasonable. "Elaine, the timing is what it is. I've had my assistant preparing these for 6 weeks. It wasn't designed around your schedule." The monitor beside her beeped a little faster. She didn't cry, not then. She felt the tears somewhere behind her sternum, but they didn't move. What moved instead was a strange, hollow disbelief, the specific feeling of discovering that a person you thought you knew had been someone else entirely for a very long time. 6 weeks, she repeated. "You've known things weren't right between us. I'm not ambushing you. You filed divorce papers the morning of my cancer surgery." "The surgery went well," the doctor said. "Get out." The voice from the doorway was not Elaine's. Clara Pendleton, the senior recovery nurse. 28 years in that unit, the kind of steady that comes only from having seen every possible version of a human crisis. Stood with her chart held flat against her chest, and her eyes fixed on Preston with an expression that left no room for negotiation. "I beg your pardon," he said. "Your wife's blood pressure just spiked 9 points in 90 seconds. Clara walked in without invitation, checked the monitor, adjusted the drip slightly. She had general anesthesia 5 hours ago. She needs rest and she needs her stress hormones to settle. You can come back during visiting hours tomorrow." Preston straightened. "I'm her husband." "Then you'll understand that her health comes first." Clara's voice was gentle in the way of things that are also completely immovable. "Sir, please." He looked at Elaine. Something crossed his face. Not remorse, more like calculation. Then he picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and left. His shoes clicked down the hallway until they didn't. Clara pulled the visitor's chair closer and sat down beside Elaine. Outside, autumn rain had started against the window. The kind of Toronto rain that settles in and means it. "You don't have to talk," Clara said. "He filed before I went under." Elaine's hands lay flat on the blanket. They weren't shaking. That surprised her. "He sat with me in pre-op and held my hand, and he'd already filed." Clara didn't offer platitudes. She had learned years ago that in certain moments, the kindest thing was simply to stay. Felix Nakamura arrived at 9:10 that evening. Elaine had not been expecting him. Felix Nakamura was the kind of solicitor who wore plain cufflinks and arrived only when he had something important to say. He had been her father's estate attorney for 18 years. He had attended her parents' anniversary dinners. He had given a quiet eulogy at her father's funeral 3 years ago that made half the room cry, while Felix himself kept perfectly still, which, Elaine had always thought, was the most dignified kind of grief. He appeared at the doorway of her recovery room, wearing a gray coat with November on the shoulders of it, carrying a weathered leather briefcase that had belonged to her father before it belonged to him. Felix. Her voice came out somewhere between relief and fear. He crossed the room without hurry and took the same chair Clara had sat in. "Clara Pendleton called me," he said simply. "I was already in the building." "Already in the building?" He set the briefcase on his knees. "I've been expecting to need to see you. I was hoping I was wrong." He paused. "Preston filed this morning." "He told me." Felix nodded. "I know what he filed, and I know why he timed it the way he did. He believes that if the divorce moves forward under standard matrimonial property rules, he can walk away with the Rosedale house, the joint investments, and the cottage on Georgian Bay. He opened the briefcase. He has for 3 years assumed that everything your family owns was either jointly held or accessible to him through the marriage." Elaine frowned. The morphine was wearing off in places now, leaving her thoughts sharper at the edges. "He's not on the Beaumont Trust." "No," Felix said. "He is not." He took out a set of documents, thick, bound, embossed at the top, with a seal she had seen her whole life but not thought about for years. "Your father set up the Beaumont Family Trust in 1991. He amended it significantly in 2008, and again in 2019, 6 months before he died." Felix looked at her steadily. "Your father was not simply a landscape architect who built a good practice. You know that much. He had investments. He had considerably more than investments." Felix placed the first document in her hands. Edward Beaumont was one of 4 founding partners of Meridian Health Group. He held a 22% stake, held entirely in trust, with you named as sole successor beneficiary. Felix let that sit for a moment. Meridian Health Group operates 9 private medical facilities in Ontario and Alberta, including this hospital. The monitor beeped. Elaine looked up slowly at the room around her, the soft amber lights, the expensive hush, the initials etched into the doorframe that she had never thought to read before. MHG. "My father owned part of this hospital," she said. 22% of the group that owns it, which, at current valuation, represents an equity stake of approximately $47 million. The trust also holds the Beaumont land parcel in Muskoka. Your grandfather's original holdings, never transferred out of family hands, never accessible to a spouse without sole beneficiary consent. Felix's tone was even, careful, and precise in the way that only mattered when the numbers were large enough to change the direction of someone's life. "Preston cannot touch any of it. He never could. What he spent 3 years assuming he was married into was, legally speaking, never his." Elaine pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment. Not from shock, from something older, from the particular ache of understanding that someone who loved you had been quietly building walls around you for years, knowing one day you might need them. "He doesn't know," she said. "He knows about the Muskoka land. Your mother mentioned it to him once, years ago. He chose to interpret it as sentimental family property, a few acres on a lake." Felix's expression was carefully neutral. "He does not know about Meridian." From somewhere down the hallway, a door opened and closed. The rain had picked up outside. The city beyond the window hummed at its usual November frequency. "I should mention," Felix said, "that I'm not the only person who came tonight." Amber Ritchie was 26 years old and had the kind of confidence that came from being told she was exceptional too many times before she had earned it. She worked as a junior associate at Preston's firm. She drove a car she couldn't quite afford and wore jewelry that had been gifts. She had, for the past 14 months, been the person Preston called when he said he was working late. She arrived at Meridian Private at 10:15 in a cream coat and ankle boots, and she walked up to the reception desk with the air of someone who expected to be let through immediately. "I'm here for Preston Aldridge," she told the desk nurse. "He's visiting a patient." The desk nurse checked the system. "Mr. Aldridge checked out 20 minutes ago." Amber blinked. She pulled out her phone, scrolled, found nothing. He hadn't answered her last 3 messages. She waited in the lobby for 11 minutes. Then she went to the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor. She was intercepted by security before she reached the recovery wing. She told the guard she was family. The guard asked her to spell the patient's last name. She spelled it wrong. She was escorted back to the ground floor, where she sat in a lobby chair and called Preston 8 times in a row. He didn't answer. The 9th call connected and then went immediately silent. Background noise, a room, breathing, and then a voice she didn't recognize said quietly, "He's unavailable," and ended the call. Amber sat in that chair for a long time with the phone in her lap. Upstairs, Felix had stepped out to make a call of his own. Clara had returned to check Elaine's vitals. The recovery room was almost peaceful for a few minutes. Just the rain and the monitors and Elaine lying in the particular stillness of someone making a decision. Then Preston reappeared. He had changed his mind about waiting until tomorrow. He walked back onto the 4th floor at 10:30, and Clara stepped in front of him at the nursing station, with the calm exactness of someone who had done this before. "Sir, I asked you to come back tomorrow. And I'm here tonight." His tone had shifted slightly. Not anger exactly, something colder. He had made a call in the car, and whatever he had heard had made him move faster. "I need 5 minutes with my wife." "I need you to respect the recovery process," Clara said. "I need you to understand who funded the North Wing renovation," he said. The nursing station went quiet. Clara did not move. "This is a medical unit," she said. "Funding doesn't change that." But Preston had already seen Felix's coat hanging on the hook outside the room, and his jaw had set in a particular way. He pushed past Clara and opened the door. Elaine looked at him from the bed with the even gaze of a woman who had, in the past 2 hours, learned something that rearranged everything. "You need to leave," she said. "What has he told you?" Preston looked at Felix, who had risen from his chair. "Whatever he said." "He told me about Meridian," Elaine said. Silence. Preston's face moved through 3 expressions in rapid succession. The third one, the one that settled, was something Elaine recognized from court depositions she'd watched him deliver, the look of a man recalibrating. "That trust is 30 years old," he said. "It has no bearing on." "It has every bearing," Felix said. "On the marital property claim, on the Muskoka parcel, and on approximately 6 other assumptions you've built into that filing." He held up the documents. "I'd encourage you to have your own counsel review these before proceeding any further." Preston's eyes went to Elaine. The recalibration fell away and something rawer took its place. Not grief, but something in that neighborhood. "Elaine, we can discuss this. We don't have to." "You filed this morning," she said, "while I was unconscious. I didn't know how to." 6 weeks, she said. "That's what you told me. 6 weeks of planning while I was going through testing, while I was getting a second opinion, while I was sitting across from you at dinner." Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, actually, to the register of someone who has finally set something very heavy down. 6 weeks. He had nothing to say to that. In the lobby, Amber had started talking to the security guard whose shift was ending. She hadn't meant to. She had just been sitting there long enough that words came out. She said something about not knowing where Preston was. The guard said something sympathetic. And then, before she fully understood what she was doing, she said, "He told me they were separated. He said the marriage was over in every way that mattered, and it was just paperwork." The guard nodded in the careful way of someone storing information. "He said as soon as she signed weed." Amber stopped. She looked at the elevator doors. "I'm going to have this baby, and he's not even answering his phone." The guard went very still. He reached for his radio. The news arrived on the 4th floor in the form of Clara, who had been briefed by the lobby nurse, who had been briefed by security. She came into the room and closed the door and told Elaine quietly what Amber Ritchie had said downstairs. Elaine closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. When she opened them, Preston was still there. He had gone very still in the way of a man watching the ground beneath him crack. Is that true? She asked. He didn't answer. Preston. She's not. It's complicated. The words came out damaged. She isn't what you're thinking. She's in the lobby of my hospital, Elaine said. Pregnant, waiting for you. This hospital, Felix said carefully, is partially owned by the Beaumont Family Trust. The sentence landed in the room with the weight of something that had been falling for a long time and had finally arrived. Preston looked at Felix, then at Elaine, then at the documents on the bedside tray. You can't. You won't. I think, Felix said, you should go downstairs and speak to Miss Ritchie. And then I think you should call your own counsel, because the filing as it stands is going to need significant revision. Preston left. No dramatic exit, no parting words. He just went. His shoes clicked down the hallway a second time, and this time Elaine knew they wouldn't be coming back. Clara came and sat beside her again. Your blood pressure's actually better, she said, looking at the monitor with something approaching quiet satisfaction. That's unusual. I think I just put something down, Elaine said. At 11:47, a courier arrived on the 4th floor, not a hospital courier, but a man in a good coat carrying an envelope sealed with wax. The nurse called Felix out to receive it. He came back into the room a few minutes later and stood in the doorway. There was a second document, Felix said. Your father wrote it in 2019, 2 months before he died. He asked that it be delivered to you in a hospital on the night you needed it most. He trusted me to judge when that was. He held out the envelope. I think tonight qualifies. Elaine broke the seal with steady hands. The handwriting was her father's, cramped and careful, the same handwriting that had signed her school permission slips and her birthday cards and the lease on her first studio. Elaine, it began. By now you know about the trust. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid that if you knew what you had, you'd spend your energy protecting it instead of living. Your mother always said I was too careful. She was right about most things. What I want you to know is this. The land, the stake, the trust, none of it was ever meant to make you powerful over anyone. It was meant to make sure no one could ever make you feel like you had nothing. You never had nothing. You came from people who built things quietly and didn't need to be thanked for it. You are one of those people even when you forget. Be well, build things, don't let anyone make you small. Love, Dad. The monitor beeped its small, steady rhythm. Outside, the rain had gone lighter, November doing what November eventually does. Clara handed her a tissue without being asked. Elaine took it and held it without using it for a long time, which felt like exactly the right thing to do. The Law Society inquiry into Preston Aldridge's professional conduct was opened 6 weeks later, based on a complaint related to a confidentiality clause he had drafted personally for Amber Ritchie. A document that, upon review by 3 separate solicitors, constituted a clear conflict of interest with his duties to multiple clients. His firm placed him on administrative leave while the inquiry proceeded. The Rosedale house went on the market in January. He was not photographed at any of the Bay Street events he had spent 4 years cultivating. Amber Ritchie cooperated with the inquiry. She had not known, she told the investigator, about the trust, the hospital stake, or the Muskoka holdings. She had believed, genuinely, that Elaine Beaumont owned a house and a career and little else. She had believed Preston when he told her the marriage had been hollow for years. She would spend some time understanding what it meant to believe someone simply because believing them was easier than the alternative. Elaine's surgery margins were clean. The follow-up pathology came back clear. She spent 3 weeks recovering at the Muskoka property. The lake house her grandfather had built, the one that had never left Beaumont hands, the one that sat at the end of a gravel road surrounded by white birch and early snow. She brought her drafting tablet and her father's letters, and, on the 3rd morning, she stood on the dock in her toque and wool coat and let herself feel the particular satisfaction of knowing exactly where she stood. On solid ground, ground that had always been hers. She would rebuild. Not out of anger and not out of spite, but out of something quieter and more durable. The understanding that the people who try to leave you with nothing often do not know what you are carrying. They see the surface and mistake it for the whole. They measure a woman by what she shows them, and never think to ask what she was given before they arrived, or what she built while they were looking the other way. Her father had known better. He had spent a lifetime knowing better, quietly, without needing anyone to notice. Elaine intended to do the same.